Welcome to the Nourished Brain podcast, where we focus on mindfulness-based whole foods nutrition and the art of empowered eating to optimize health, mood, energy, and nutritional well-being. I'm Sarah Fajera, an integrative and functionally minded registered dietitian and owner of Mindfully Nourished Solutions. Let's get you nourished. Katherine Stephens-Bogard is owner and founder of the nutrition consulting practice Functionally NouRisheD, otherwise known as FUNRD by KSB LLC. Functionally NouRisheD integrates the science of Western medicine with the contemplative practices of Eastern philosophy to promote health of body, mind, and spirit for those struggling with disordered eating and eating disorders. Clients of Katherine's receive an individualized nutrition prescription of nutrient-dense foods intended to restore the physical body to whole health, in tandem with mindfulness practices, yoga, pranayama, breath work, and focused concentration, developed in collaboration with the client's other treatment team members as appropriate. Katherine's webpage is under construction, but in the interim, she can be reached via email at katherinestevensbogard@gmail.com. I'll share with listeners that I first came across your work when I was reading an article in the Integrative RDN, which is the newsletter put out by the Dietitians in Integrative and Functional Medicine Practice Group. This article was titled Microbes at the Table: The Role of the Gut Microbiome and Related Nutritional Interventions in the Treatment of Anorexia Nervosa. I was just blown away by how comprehensive it was, and even that you were able to write an article about that, because I feel like it's a much newer paradigm. It's not something that's traditionally talked about, I don't think, in eating disorder treatment. So I thought that a conversation linking the microbiome and eating behaviors would be really interesting and really helpful for listeners. So Katherine, please just tell us a little bit first about your background as it relates to what we'll be talking about today.
Well, first, thank you for the introduction, and I'm glad that article was helpful. That article was a labor of love by both myself and my co-author, in more ways than one. I think it was a labor of love of professional work, but it was a labor of passionate love, in the sense that it's topics that she and I were both incredibly passionate about from two different ends. So thank you for having it be meaningful, because it's, we did it for that reason. But a little bit about me. So yes, I am a registered dietitian nutritionist. And I say, that is one of the many hats that I wear. My undergrad was in exercise science, exercise physiology, and health promotion, long before that was a vogue field. So I graduated from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, way back a long time ago. And I was the first class that actually had the wellness component of our exercise physiology degree. So I was kind of on the cutting edge way back then. And I laugh because I think, that was probably foreshadowing things to come. So I did a lot of work in exercise physiology, sports nutrition, that kind of component of it. That led me back to graduate school. I did my graduate work at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, and it was a master's in nutrition science. So the emphasis was not merely clinical nutrition, but a lot of biochemistry, nutritional biochemistry, anatomy and physiology. And I thought, why am I doing this? And now I look back again, foreshadowing kind of where I'm at now. It's just amazing how things layer upon one another. So the work that I do now is really specializing in neuroendocrine health, nutritional neuropsychiatry. So really looking at the role that nutrition plays in the brain and in the body, and then really working as a member of, I don't want to say a tight team, but kind of a collaborating team where you get referrals, because I work on an outpatient basis at a hospital and then have a private practice as well. So you kind of get referrals for various health conditions related to the brain and and the body. So really looking at gastrointestinal issues, diabetes, and then how that integrates with just good nutrition. With the favorite part of my job, and really the part I'm passionate about, is the spectrum of eating disorders, disordered eating. So, the classic ones that we think about: anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, the newest one to the DSM-5, binge eating disorder. Some ones that are not technically a part of the DSM-5. So, orthorexia and food addiction, they're really not, in the category yet. That could be good, bad, or otherwise, but we know that it exists. So, what kind of led me there was I call it the serendipitous path. Medicine is unfortunately, or, I like to say Western medicine, for its brilliance in diagnosing conditions. We in Western medicine tend to get very tunnel vision. So, the cardiologist looks at the heart, the endocrinologist looks at the endocrine system, the psychiatrist looks at the brain, the geneticist looks at genes, the hematologist looks at blood, and I think sometimes we forget, and I'm going to, of course, age myself, the game of operation where the thigh bone was connected to the brain, and we all laughed at that. And I remember playing that game. No, it's not. And then I look back and I go, oh, it's so connected. So the fields, when we think of neuropsychiatry, it's really looking at, so psychiatry is looking at the human psyche relative to the brain, but not looking at it just from, quote unquote, someone's persona, their phenotype, their personality, but looking at what are the neurological factors. From a genetic perspective, what are the neurological factors from a nutritional perspective? What are the neurological factors from a pharmacology? So if they have been on meds or are going to be on meds, how does their neurological system, their central nervous system, both components, the central nervous system, the autonomic, the sympathetic, parasympathetic, how does the nervous system affect their psyche? So, we look at that and not just say, oh, it's their personality, but what's influencing their personality? I mean, our experiences influence us, but I don't think it's just our social experience. It's really our environmental experiences, experiences that we don't even know we had. So that would be our what's called neuroepigenetics. So epigenetics is, genetics, so how our genes are influencing our health, but what happens before we're even born? What is happening in the preconception, the periconception, and what's called the intranatal period. So when, you and I were just, little creatures in the womb, our personalities, our neurology, our biochemistry was being formed even then. And so, looking at those factors, and, we can't necessarily change that. So no guilt to parents of going, oh, great, now it is my fault. It's not. No, it's not. It's just understanding that there are things that, we may never change, but that doesn't mean we can't recognize that. So, there's that quote, and I'm going to get it wrong in this moment. We use it in addiction, the wisdom to know, change what you can change, and the wisdom to know the difference. We're not going to change everything, but if we know what we can change, then we can focus our energies and our efforts on that, create a team around us, whether they're, if a child or a person yourself is, struggling with restrictive eating. So we can't go back in the womb. We can't pick different parents. We can't pick a different environment, but we can say, okay, that happened to me. Can I forgive? Can I move on? Can I work through that part of my psyche? Where can I focus my energies? And so looking at, we can definitely change our eating and let it become less restrictive, more inclusive, more expansive, so that we're getting then the nutrient building blocks to be able to change our biochemistry from today forward. Can't go back, but we can certainly alter the course of our future by the choices that we make.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that there are a number of influences from the prenatal period onward that can influence eating decisions or formation of eating patterns, including factors that might not be readily apparent or that could be flying under the radar.
Oh, absolutely. There's just no doubt about that. And as opposed to getting derailed on kind of the neuro chemistry and the nutritional neurochemistry we're going to talk about today, I'm actually getting ready, as an aside, to do a training all of next week, actually, on mindfulness-based eating, and inclusion of yoga as part of the spectrum of eating disorder and treatment. And one of the books that the presenter is having us read is called East Meets West, and it's really looking at Eastern philosophies and how those things shape our biology, which is the whole idea of the Western medical model. And it is coming back in, and I think, oh my gosh, it's the Eastern version of epigenetics and microbiology and things that we don't even know have happened to us that are influencing the decisions that we make. And we just cannot separate our brain and our body. We can't. Our head is connected to our body, and our brain is connected to our body. And I know we just like to, we meaning medicine, I think, tries to simplify it, which is a beautiful thing, but it also then loses the incredible essence of who we are.
Katherine, let's step back for just a moment and talk through some terminology. You had mentioned the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual for diagnosing mental health disorders, including eating disorders. So could you talk us through some of the criteria for different eating disorders, and also what makes an eating disorder different from restrictive eating or chronic dieting? And then what's the difference between those two things and just selectively choosing foods for health reasons? Where is selective eating gone wrong? And where does it start to veer into disordered eating?
So, yes, the DSM-5, that's the abbreviation for the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the 5th edition, and that is a manual that is used for diagnoses of mental health or psychiatric illnesses. And there are very specific criteria for mental health or neuropsychiatric illnesses in specific. So when we look at eating disorders are in the DSM-5, and there are, I'm going to say 4, and then there are nuances of the 4. So anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, and then something that's called OFSED, which is other feeding eating disorder, which kind of is a catch-all phrase. So anorexia classically is considered, we don't want to say underweight, though that has historically been what it is, but I think there's now a new phenotype with anorexia nervosa where it's more of an intense fear of weight gain and becoming fat, historically, though, despite a low body weight. Atypical anorexia would then have that same criteria of fear of overweight, but it may happen in the context of normal weight or rapid weight loss. we actually see that status post or after bariatric surgery. So someone is losing weight, so they're still on their BMI overweight, but their rate of weight loss is excessive, and they develop this orthorexic, which we'll talk about in a moment, restrictive eating that becomes unhealthy, even though they're overweight. So it's a fear of excess adiposity, a fear of fat, a fear of weight gain that is ungrounded, with very restrictive food rules where you're eliminating entire food groups with often refusal to eat. That can be accompanied by a method of purging, or it may just be accompanied by absolute caloric restriction. So purging can be, we can think of excessive exercise or inappropriate exercise as a purge. Certainly vomiting as a purge, diuretics, laxatives could be a purge as well. And so those are examples of purges. There, when we look at restrictive eating, we can see some kind of nuances of stuff that's kind of faddish that I think we could also call as a purge, but more on that in a moment. So bulimia is the same purging behaviors, but without restrictive eating, and they're usually near normal body weight, maybe slightly over, slightly under, but their body weight is not in the rapid downward trend or excessively low. And then binge eating is just eating out of control. So there is no what is called compensatory behavior. So no excessive exercise, no restrictive eating. They're not compensating for the excess calories. So that's kind of the criteria that we look at. So restrictive eating is just, it can be both, and I hate these words, good and bad. So I like to call it health promoting and health deteriorating rather than good and bad. So restrictive eating in a health promoting way would be, for example, I have celiac disease. So celiac disease is a condition where you cannot eat gluten. I don't not eat gluten because it's a fad. Trust me, I'd love to have real brick oven pizza with a real pizza crust. That's the good stuff. I'd love it. But my system just doesn't tolerate that. So restrictive eating in that sense, and in this, my example is, avoiding something that is known to make me quite ill. And so, that's not gone wrong. That's actually gone right. Gone wrong, I think, is the faddish component of that, where the media has said, oh, gluten is bad for us. It causes all these things, kind of exaggerating or taking from those of us who have celiac disease, where it does cause all those things. That is not to say there isn't something that is very real called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And that is, it's real, it exists. But I think when everybody that doesn't even have that says, I'm not eating, whole grain bread, or I'm not going to have an egg and avocado toast, because everybody knows that toast is bad. It's bread, it's gluten. And we start eliminating foods with no individual biochemical consideration for our own health while we're eliminating it. We get in and said, well, I heard on the internet it was bad. And so we eliminate that because we heard it was bad or not good for us, or it could do this. And then we create a fear or a phobia around that. And that often then translates into restricting something, maybe something else. So, healthful restrictive eating is eliminating food or foods to which we have a known allergy or sensitivity, or in the case of somebody having diabetes, managing the total allotment of carbohydrate that they eat, again, to promote an improvement in their glucose levels, for example. Restrictive eating is taking that, to, I call it the nth degree, but taking it out where there's no individual rhyme or reason for it other than a fear or a phobia or the desire to control, to control something. We can think of it in terms of whole foods, nutrition. I think, Sarah, you and I definitely promote whole foods nutrition, but, I don't think that we would never not eat, I'm thinking of Halloween next week, if our kids have a candy or, I work in an office where we have little kids and we'll have a trick or treat day for the pediatric patients that come through. I'm sure that I will have some not dark chocolate, one of my favorites that are in there. It's not something I do every day, but I espouse whole foods nutrition, but I'm not going to not eat a Tootsie Roll that day just because, it's normal. And so restrictive eating gone awry doesn't allow for indulgences and splurges that are part of our normal cultural way of living. At least that's kind of how I define it or see it.
So talk to us a little bit about the relationship between gastrointestinal health and specifically the gut microbiome, or this term dysbiosis in restrictive eating, and why it matters, thinking about both how our eating patterns maybe could impact the gut microbiome and how that cycle kind of goes back the other direction. And what can happen with certain eating patterns that might be a little more health suppressive, or not health promoting.
So absolutely, we can look at that. So before we delve into that, so thinking about your previous question in terms of definition, let me kind of just talk about what the gut microbiome is and kind of a definition or a working definition of dysbiosis. So the gut is the gastrointestinal tract. It's just our shorter way of saying that, though people go, that's just such a negative word. It is what it is. But it's the microbiome, we all have it. The microbiome is an incredible colony of living microorganisms, both bacteria, yeast, fungi, and protozoa that support our health. And, the microbiological research would say that we have more microbes, so gut, bacteria, fungi, protozoa in our system than we actually have human body cells. So that's just a little factoid. But it's so the gut microbiome is this inner networking of really, really small species that live in this case, the gastrointestinal tract. So the gastrointestinal tract being both the oral cavity all the way down to the anus. I mean, typically people think of gut microbiome, they're really thinking of the small and large intestine, but it is actually it's the whole entire tube or canal of the gastrointestinal tract. So it's the bacteria that are living in there. We have a microbiome actually in our skin. We have a skin microbiome. We have a vaginal microbiome as well. So we've got lots of bacteria everywhere that are doing amazing things to promote our health when it's in a symbiotic relationship. So the symbiotic relationship is then when it's promoting health. Dysbiosis, meaning dys being disease, biosis is when the microbiome or the microbiology of our system, in this case the gastrointestinal tract, is out of sorts or out of whack. So there may be a preponderance of one type of bacteria versus another. So stepping aside of or outside of disordered eating, kind of the classic one, there's two classics actually that I think of. One is pretty powerful and the other one's kind of more subtle. So the really obvious element of dysbiosis is kind of in the medical world called C. diff or Clostridium difficile. That is a very, very infectious diarrhea that typically happens after long-term antibiotic in the patient that is either immune compromised or malnourished from whatever cause. So that is really dysbiosis, kind of in I call it dysbiosis on steroids. And then we can also think of, if any one of us would take an antibiotic for, let's say, for example, a urinary tract infection. We're then at risk for dysbiosis in the vaginal tract and elsewhere. We just need to kind of reset that. So dysbiosis is just a proliferation of quote unquote bad bacteria or pathogenic bacteria is kind of what we look at it in the microbiology world, so that it's displacing the good bacteria, or what we call the probiotics or probacteria.
Talk to us a little bit, just definition-wise, about the gut-brain axis, and how that might relate to, potentially to eating behavior, eating disorders, or disordered eating.
Oh, that's a loaded question. How many hours do we have for this?
I know. Yeah, but just to kind of touch on that, I mean, because you do such a great job. I have this article in front of me that you wrote, and I wish that we could show an image here with the audio, because
I was going to say, once upon a time,
you have this beautiful picture about how.
Think of the article in the podcast notes, and they can read it. Okay.
Where you have these basically signals that are produced or modulated by GI microorganisms, and you kind of have, there's like an arrow up and down, right? How they have an effect on host physiology and health. So specifically as it really relates to eating disorders, just to build on what you just talked about.
Yes, in all seriousness, so when we look at the game of operation, where is the thigh bone really connected to the brain? I guess maybe the better one is, is the stomach really connected to the brain? And the answer is yes. And it is connected through something that we call the enteric nervous system. Fancy word, that's the medical word for the gut-brain axis. And it's really a neurological system that connects the brain, the nervous system, to the gastrointestinal tract. So, and the nerve is called the vagal nerve, which, if you like Latin and want another factoid, that's the wandering nerve. And it literally wanders from the brain all the way down through the gastrointestinal tract. And it touches almost every organ in the GI tract. So the stomach, gallbladder, small intestine, all three parts of the small intestine, the large intestine. And it's a bi-directional, or a two-way highway. So what goes on in the gut goes on in the brain, and vice versa. What happens in the brain goes on in the gut. And so we as a culture, so kind of goes into cultural conditioning about eating. We, how many of us have said, I had this gut reaction that something was going to happen, and we just know it in our gut, and we all go, well, we need the science for that. But really, the part of that gut reaction is we felt something in our gut. The microbiome in the gut actually produces neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are signals that communicate to the brain and the rest of the body. Kind of the one we commonly know in nutrition that's really out there, kind of in the general public as well, is serotonin, or norepinephrine. So serotonin we think of when we talk about the SSRIs, Prozac, escitalopram, the generic forms of some of the medications, the pharmacological agents that we use for depression, anxiety, and so forth. But serotonin is made in the gut. We think it's actually, most people think, oh, it's made in the brain. No, it's made in the gut, transported to the brain by this gut-brain axis and the different carrier mechanisms that channel along the vagal nerve. And so when we think about restrictive eating, for example, so if we just look at serotonin, just as one example of a neurotransmitter and how it's affected in the gut, serotonin is made or synthesized from two amino acids being protein building blocks. And the two are tyrosine and tryptophan, just by way of example. And so when I think of some of my clients with restrictive eating, they might say, well, I'm not going to eat cheese because cheese is fattening, or I'm not going to eat dairy or milk because milk is lactose and I don't want to have gas because, everyone thinks, the whole world thinks they have lactose intolerance. There's not saying that people don't, but they worry about that. So that may be an element of, restrictive eating, or I'm going to eliminate dairy because of a fear. Or, my other favorite one with these in particular is eliminating, really good animal protein. So I'm not talking chicken nuggets. I'm not talking, or chicken, that kind of thing, or turkey sausage or turkey bacon, but, really good fowl. So chicken thighs or turkey breast or, fish, wild caught fish, an example. Those are great sources of tyrosine and tryptophan. If we eliminate those, we are actually eliminating the amino acids that build serotonin. That happens in the gut. The brain doesn't get the chemicals that it needs. So then we're kind of running low on serotonin. And that has a cascade of problems. But, kind of the biggest one that comes to my mind when we look at the integration of treatment, we're not saying, eat fish, don't take your pharmacological agent that's been prescribed, but the agent that you're taking. So if you're taking an SSRI, that SSRI is recycling serotonin. It's not making it, it's recycling it. The body has to make it in order for it to be recycled. So, looking at the fact that, there's an example of one of the terms we looked at the beginning, neuropsychiatry or neuropharmacology. We, have to look at the neurological system. What medication are we giving, and how is food, either the food that we're not eating or the food that we need to eat, influencing, the proper use or the proper functioning of a medication that we might be prescribed. Dialing up the dose because someone still has depression, they might need the medicine, but maybe they actually need to have, some chicken breast and, if they want it coated to make their own homemade chicken nuggets, maybe we need to coat it in, kind of roasted oats or quinoa to get it crunchy, and then dip it in guacamole to get all the nutrients that we to feed the brain to do the job. And then, if they're restricting guacamole because, oh my gosh, it's high in fat, or avocados, because they're afraid of fat because, fat's bad. It causes you to be fat. That whole kind of idea that we have this myth about the nutrients, then we're perpetuating, the problem. So our neurological system isn't working the way it should. That's now sending a signal back to the gut that we don't want that food. We don't eat that food. It goes back to the brain, and it becomes this snowball that kind of goes downhill fast and doesn't become this fun snowman, but becomes this avalanche that kind of destroys or has the potential to deteriorate our health.
Yeah, and then there's that piece where you think about the bacteria that populate your gut and your gastrointestinal health to a point determines what foods you can even tolerate. Right? So thinking about lactose intolerance, people who's perhaps celiac, right, that's been untreated, whose guts are really damaged, may have, for a time, a lactose intolerance. But then over time, as their gut heals, as enzyme capacity restores, they're able to tolerate again, or to a different level. I think about that too when it comes to beans and legumes even, thinking about, gosh, all those nutrients for brain health, including folate, right? Folate, magnesium, and how so many people really struggle with digestion, not realizing that in addition to, all of the wisdom around soaking and cooking well and all of that sometimes it does just come down to not having the bacterial colonies really represented in strong numbers at that point, but knowing that you can actually enhance digestion over time as you introduce different foods. So that seems to be an important piece of this whole gut-brain thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate the whole idea of beans, because that's one of those ones that, can be part of the deleterious restrictive eating. I certainly advocate in many ways kind of a paleo approach of eating, the whole foods based eating. But even in that community early on, it was don't eat beans. And, people got very restrictive, orthorexic. Oh my gosh, I can't have that. I'll be unhealthy. I won't be following my paleo diet. And the literature, the scientific literature, has really kind of come back full circle of saying, well, no, we actually may need to avoid it if you're in an autoimmune crisis. If you away, letting the gut heal. As that gut heals, we might be able to reintroduce beans in small doses, prepared certain ways, especially when it's prepared with a bone broth that has the collagen and the glutamine and those nutrients that are actually healing the junction spaces. How we combine those foods so that they can actually have some, maybe not as much as somebody else, but being able to reintroduce that, because the beautiful thing about those beans is that they are what I call a prebiotic. So probiotic is the bacteria. A prebiotic, I like to think of it as the house in which the bacteria lives. And that fiber in the legume, in the bean wall, really is the house. It's a prebiotic, and it helps the bacteria actually colonize. So by totally avoiding it, you're actually starving the bacteria that may help it to digest. So it's this amazing synergy of eliminating one has a cascade downward, mindful, intentional, calculated, so to speak, introduction of those foods, especially in combination with other foods that are going to enhance nutrients, is really important in terms of giving that bacteria, what it needs. It needs the house. Now the bacteria can grow.
So I love that you brought the prebiotic piece in. Can you define for us just, the way that you see probiotics, and then this term that's come on the scene, psychobiotics, again, why they matter in terms of this bigger conversation about optimizing health with nutrition?
So yes, we just need to put the terminology definition in that article on the podcast. A probiotic, and this is a definition that it circulates in the microbiology literature. They're live microorganisms that, when eaten or administered, so eaten in terms of food, administered if we were to take it in a supplement, so that kind of leads into the psychobiotic piece. But when administered, they're conferring a health benefit, whatever that health benefit might be. So a prebiotic is the non-digestible part of that food that really serves as material, building blocks, so to speak, for the house, so that bacteria, so the probiotic has a house to live in. So a prebiotic is the substances and substrates that allow the probiotic to do its job. So it's the staging area, so to speak. So psychobiotics then are both pre and probiotics that work synergistically or together. So again, you can't have one without the other, that actually are designed for, at this point, mental health. So that's kind of the psychology, the psychiatric, the psych piece. That's where that prefix comes from. So it's the biotic, the bacteria, and the house that are conferring or giving a psychiatric or a mental health, so to speak, benefit to the individual taking it. The whole psychobiotic piece is really in its infancy, and I cannot think of it. I must need to eat avocados, or I need some dark chocolate. What do I need? Something for my brain in this moment. There's a researcher in England, out of the UK. They have that. Sarah, you've referenced it in a previous podcast. They have this amazing book that looks at all the different bacteria and what they do.
It's John Cryan, probably. He's in Ireland.
Yeah. That's who it is.
Yeah.
His book is amazing. Really looks at at the different bacteria, kind of compiling it from all the literature, what bacteria does what. At this point, his work is probably seminal. It's probably in its infancy, I would dare say. We just don't have that is the one place I think we need research, is really how do these bacteria work? And are they conferring the benefit? And if we do the bacteria, the probiotic, what prebiotic do we need to get the psychobiotic effect? I mean, they work together. I think what happens is, I see it, and I'm sure you probably do too. People go, I'm just going to go supplement shopping. I'm going to take this bacteria, and it doesn't get the result that they want because we're eating supplements. Not that that's a bad thing per se, but supplements don't replace food. A supplement doesn't have fiber in it. And so, needing both of them, because you need the prebiotic as well. You can't just take the bacteria. And if you do, you're going to always have to take it. But again, it has to have some place to live, to populate, to reproduce, to confer its benefit.
Wow, all these definitions out on the table, right? From restrictive eating to anorexia to dysbiosis and prebiotics and psychobiotics. Big picture here is that what we know is that gastrointestinal health, mood, weight, and eating behavior are all connected in really dynamic and complicated ways. We know that feedback about perhaps how we feel after eating a food can impact our desire to eat it again or not, that the state of our digestive health can impact how we feel after eating that food, right? So would you say that overall, as you're thinking about trying to optimize health for someone who's either really very, very restricted with what they're eating for a variety of reasons, or for someone who just feels like, they're not really sure what choices to make because they just maybe don't feel great about eating, or they're just really confused, what would you say is really the starting point? Is it the gut? Is it, like you said, fermented foods? Is it a supplement? Is it thinking about, the food choices themselves? Like where should someone even start if they know that this connection exists? How can they take advantage of some of the knowledge that's coming out? What's the clinical application, so to speak?
Geez. Awesome question. And I'm just, my head is kind of spinning and it's circular. And so I kind of think of an analogy of that. And I work with my clients and I always think of word pictures. I think it's a rat on a treadmill, or you're just on that merry-go-round on the playground. And I think the honest answer for me in this moment, start at wherever feels safest and most manageable and empowering to you. Which probably as a dietitian, I think dietitians would be like, of course you got to start with food. Well, yeah, maybe, but if food's the fear, then don't start with the food. Maybe, and I this comes into my yoga background, maybe you go to your yoga mat and you just move. You do some twisting, some warriors, you breathe diaphragmatically. Diaphragmatic breathing slows down or activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Maybe you just need to dial down the stress so that your GI tract can actually think about food, or your brain can think about food. And then you can, meet with a dietitian, nutritionist specializing in this, and work at it that way. So maybe you do a few classes on your yoga mat. Maybe you need to meet with your therapist and just say, I've been reading, listening, hearing, there's this connection between the gut and the brain. I'm afraid of food. Don't tell me I need to eat yet. Maybe you just need to talk about, this is the fear. What we resist persists. So, saying I'm afraid of this, maybe that they've never used those words. So use the words. Language is powerful. And, so start there. Share with that you're feeling, and as you become more comfortable articulating what you're feeling, that's part of the brain piece, then maybe you can get to the gut. And this is assuming that someone is this is a big word, relatively healthy. Obviously, if someone is super malnourished, they've got anorexia, they're not eating at all, and they're passing out, food has to come first. Even if it has to be forced, because you can't do any of those other things without some sort of nutrition to the body and the brain. So, sometimes we have to start there, but I think in an kind of an ambulatory outpatient real world setting when it's not, dire or life and death, and kind of start where you think you can start. And then know that that's the starting point. That's not the end point. That's the beginning of an amazing unfolding journey.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to highlight either a few, specific foods or maybe bacterial strains that really stand out to you as especially promising, that people might be able to, look into or think about bringing in to their rotation?
Yes, absolutely. So the two kind of bacterial species, and this is where my co-author of this article is the expert. So, if someone's a microbiologist, I might have the language wrong, and I will stand corrected, please. But when we think about the phyla or the family, it's the lactobacilli and the bifidobacterium. So there's different. So I think of that as the last name. So my last name being Stephens-Bogard, yours being Ferreira. That's kind of the family, and then there are members of that family. So we think about those two family names, the lactobacilli and the bifidobacterium, are kind of two that we would start with. And I would start with food first and supplements second, because based on the preemptive piece that you gave me is they have a good idea of food. So we're not starting from malnourished, we're starting from a relatively decent foundation. And so, the foods there are things like walnuts and broccoli and tomatoes, some cheese, mushrooms, kind of as a place to start. And then we think about the house, they would need some whole grains. It could be, oats, it could be quinoa, some sort of source of fiber, flax or chia seeds. Then you're getting a couple other things. So, like a sprouted bread, or a sourdough bread even would be amazing. This is when I wish I didn't have celiac disease. But a sprouted bread, and then I think, what does that look like? So you're like, okay, you just said all these foods, and now you've said, how am I going to eat that? Kind of one food that comes to mind, or kind of a meal that kind of comes to mind, is avo. I call it the avo egg toast. Yes, it's faddish. Yes, it's vogue. But yes, it's amazing for the gut-brain axis and our mood, especially if that bread was a sprouted bread that had chia and flax in it. And we slice some avocados on there, a little feta or a goat cheese maybe, and then a poached egg on top of that. You want to talk about food for the brain and the skin, and yum. Mm-hmm. That would be kind of, there you could start your day there. And then if you needed a snack in the morning, maybe a Greek yogurt, vanilla, and then you add your own berries, maybe some blueberries for some antioxidants, and then chop up some pecans and almonds on that. Lunch could certainly be, a nice, delicious spinach salad, shredded beets, roasted's my favorite, a little bit then of goat cheese. You might want to put some salmon on there, maybe some chicken. So now again, more brain food. If we're talking about not restrictive eating, here's my favorite afternoon snack, and get some dark chocolate. And I have my own, I call it my own candy bar. My office mates always go, oh, it's the afternoon. There, she's getting her brain food. And they know why, because I go, oh, I justify this one, but it's just like, it's some dark chocolate, and I'm like, but it has magnesium in it. It has polyphenols in it. Fiber from my almonds, so I kind of will take a couple bites of both of those. Dried cranberries, again, for the fiber, so I get some tartness and some taste. So again, it's a fun food. It's not saying that chocolate's bad. It's just saying recognizing where it's at, and I'm not going to not eat it, and looking at at those nutrients in there, and then kind of thinking about the rest of the day of if someone's doing a more plant-based. I love quinoa tabbouleh. So, using quinoa and parsley and tomatoes, onions and lemon juice and a little bit of olive oil and, cumin in there. Somebody, doesn't, wants to eat some animal protein with it, take your pick. I live out in Colorado, and it's now elk hunting season, and I'm hoping that my husband and his friends find some for us. Having that with it, if, I know back east, deer hunting season is going to start soon. So venison is amazing. It has a ton of nutrients in it. But, even something as simple as chicken or some fish, if you're doing, adding meat, if you're not, then just really saying, can I add other, kind of brain food, protein sources? Maybe, you'll add a little more nuts to that, or, putting in some, cannelli beans, or, if you tolerate that, so putting some beans into that and kind of making it, a little richer there. I mean, that has all of the nutrients that build the various neurotransmitters. It's has all of the prebiotics, house, and then with the fermented foods, the yogurt, as an example, some of the cheeses, you're then going to get also some of the bacteria. And there it is. I mean, now you've got a meal, a food. We eat food, we don't eat nutrients. I think we dietitians are good at analyzing all the nutrients, and that's the joke at our house. My kids always say, "Mom, what are we eating?" And I analyze it in nutrients, and they just look at me and go, "Oh, great." And that's a whole other story. It's a funny one. I'd love to share it, but we eat food, so putting it in food. And then if we can't eat the food, I'm certainly not opposed to supplementing, but I just always think supplementing needs to be done wisely, and ideally, prescribed or prescribed by someone who's very familiar with what that bacteria is going to do, the good and the bad. I'm not so sure. And I don't make any friends here. I know that supplement shopping at GNC or Sprouts or Vitamin Cottage or even Whole Foods necessarily is the wisest thing. I'm not opposed to supplements, and I'm not opposed to purchasing them in any of those places. I think it's a wise, if we're talking about a psychobiotic, we're talking about a bacteria functioning as a drug, I think that comes with the wisdom of somebody that has some knowledge about that.
So really it is possible to think about designing a day worth of intake in terms not of just foods that might be good or bad, or that might bring up anxiety, whatever it might be, but instead stepping back and thinking, okay, so what can I choose at what times of the day to kind of optimize this gut-brain function? Am I bringing in foods that are rich in prebiotic fiber? Am I integrating in some fermentable foods and beverages? Where are my brain foods? Where are my long chain fatty acids? Where are my eggs, right? Where are my fats, if it's plant-based omega-3s, my other monounsaturated fats, and almost kind of designing, like you have here in this article, this mindfulness-based functional food meal plan. I think it's just a beautiful concept. Thinking like, okay, what are all the opportunities that you can plug in throughout the day to feel your best, right? To get this connection humming right along. It's fantastic. Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, just kind of to summarize all of this, what really should people take away from this conversation we've had? What do you feel is really important for people to know? And what do you think really we still need to know? What should people kind of be looking out for, and any other resources you would share?
Oh, that's a loaded question, but thanks for asking it. I just think that food nourishes us. And, I just think of, what the name of this podcast is. I mean, and I love the name of it because food nourishes us. It doesn't just fuel us in the terms of supporting our health and giving us energy, but it needs to nourish us from the inside out. But I don't want to just think of food as just nutrients, just fuel. It also needs to be enjoyable. So that's the kind of brain piece. It's that bidirectional piece. we need to eat foods that we like. Now, if we have phobias around them, or disordered thoughts around them, working through that is absolutely imperative, because, all foods, and this is a trite statement and I like to kind of clarify it, but all foods can fit. It's whether they should or shouldn't fit. And that is individual biochemistry, both the biochemistry that has gone awry and the biochemistry that is going right. We need to support what's going right, and fix the dysbiosis and the awry. So I think, looking at it, food, we're in relationship with food. When we think of disordered eating, sometimes it can be kind of addictive. And, a lot of times in the addiction models, we say live without it. And one of the things I always tell my clients is we can't live without food. We need to learn to live in relationship with it, allow it to serve us, but allow us to enjoy it in its service. It's this, it's bidirectional, not just gut to brain, but enjoyment to service, service to enjoyment. So it would take away that it nourishes us, and that is nourishing our mind, our body, and our spirit. So I think that's the biggest piece for me is, we don't want to just look at food just nutritionally, nutrient-wise. We also want to look at from a sensual pleasure piece of it. One isn't more important than the other. So just being in a harmonious, synergistic relationship, I think, is, for me, probably the take home. And then, sometimes we need to upregulate foods for one thing and downregulate them other places, depending on what's kind of going on in our life. And that's completely okay and desirable, as a matter of fact. So I think that's kind of the biggest passion piece for me. And what more research do we need? Oh, we need a ton.
We sure do.
Oh, we need so much.
Katherine, that was beautifully said.
I would love to see a lot more done really on the psychobiotics, the pre and the pro, both from an isolated species perspective. So, pick out a lactobacilli or a bifidobacteria, then pick out, one species within that, then pick out the combination together, and look at it both that way. What happens if we supplement? What happens if we don't? But I also think we need to then look at it in terms of food, because it works together. It works synergistically. And that's what makes food research so difficult, is we can't isolate just one thing. Randomized controlled trials relative to food are just laborious and expensive. So we're left with clinical research, which I don't necessarily think is always bad. So, what we need more of is people willing to, do case histories, because there's a lot that can be said there. I mean, this paper was born, in many ways of a couple clients' case stories, really. And that was the genesis of this paper. It was the genesis of my meeting my co-author. And so collaboration across disciplines rather than siloing disciplines, I think, is also needed. I just love the work that you do you're inviting so many people to be a part of this, part of your community. I mean, that's the collaboration. And that's the beautiful thing. We need a lot more of that, more integration there. I mean, when I think of integrative medicine, I think we always think that, integrate the East and the West, which I'm all about. I mean, I'm a yoga teacher, so yes, I'm all about it. But we need to integrate disciplines. Each have our specialty, but I work with therapists, and I'm okay when they recommend foods. If they've looked at my notes and they're saying, hey, did you do this, this, or this? And what about this? That reinforces what we do. And that's so I think we need a lot more collaborative and integrative things as well across research.
I would love to see in the next 5 or 10 years more research done where really a mix of the microbiome has been established, and food-based interventions are brought in with select fermented foods based on baseline microbial composition to see what shifts and changes versus probiotic supplements, kind of depending on, the health of the microbiome, just already present, and to experience basically how some of those depression rating scores and things like that shift and change, in correlation to the mix of microbial species and all of that, plus then the interventions on top of that. So I think we're going to see that. I think that's the direction we're moving in. Yeah, so we're going to cross our fingers and and hopefully be a part of it, right? For sure, because I know we both love where all this is going. So fantastic. So Katherine, any other final notes? And then I'd love for you to share how people can get a hold of you. If anything that you've mentioned today has really just grabbed somebody and they want to just drop you a note or chat more with you.
I guess my invitation is to kind of the listeners. I would say thanks for listening, but as you meet with a provider, especially if they're in integrative medicine, be open, honest, and willing, because your stories are the ones that are going to form the research.
Mm-hmm.
They are. If you say, I did this, who knows? We may be able to say, hey, we can do a stool sample, we can culture or get your gut microbiome now. Let's do this.
Mm-hmm.
With all of the genetics that are out there. Your story may be the impetus for this vision, Sarah, that you and I have. So I just say it's, we're not in charge. Healthcare really should be a team. Your audience, when they're seeking out services, they're the drivers. We're really just the tools that they use. We can direct them.
Yeah.
But if they're just, vulnerable and open to participating, that research that we would love to see, they may be that research.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point.
Invite honesty. Be willing to say you're taking supplements. I think we get scared about it.
Oh, for sure.
I shouldn't take that, and that gives us, us the data and the stories to put that research together and create that next piece. It's clinical research. So
yes,
that would be my invitation to your audience. Is just be willing to share and be vulnerable. That way we all win.
Mm-hmm.
And where can people get a hold of me?
Yes, please.
So right now it's in flux. No, not completely. So I am in Colorado. So I work at a health system in Colorado, SEL Health at St. Mary's. And so, they can reach me there. I also am in the process of starting or formalizing kind of my private practice. I've done some client work with clients that I worked at before I moved to Colorado, but I'm in the process of finalizing that. So the best email probably is my what will be my professional email in my private practice, which is Katherine, Katherine, Stephens-Bogard, STEPHENSBOGARD @gmail.com.
Fantastic. And Katherine, once you get everything in place, I'd love for you to share your website and any other links that you have, so we can just link them, right below this, so people can just kind of click and connect that way. Because it's just to hear all this is really wonderful, because you can tell it's really been informed by a lot of experience and really kind of walking through this type of process you've described with people, and seeing the good, bad, the ugly, and all the possibility that's often there that sometimes maybe isn't even evident, when you first start. So it's been wonderful to talk with you and hear more about your perspective. And thank you for all the the info and definitions you gave us. This was really just a really beautiful, rich discussion. So appreciate you.
You're so welcome. Well, thanks for the invite. I appreciated it. It was, I know this was, it's science heavy, and I think people think nutrition, you go to, you see a nutritionist, oh, they're just going to tell me what to eat and not, and so many more nuances behind.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm a science geek, and so thanks for putting up with all the definitions and all of that, because this is where I just kind of go, ooh, baby.
Yeah. So that's the invitation that I always like to extend to, just to kind of close us out here, that, to anyone who's listening, if you're feeling stuck or frustrated, know that there are clinicians out there, practitioners, integrative dietitians who are ready to support you in taking the next step and creating a really collaborative, integrative plan that brings in all of this and more. So don't stop looking, because sometimes it just takes, just a little more time to find that connection and the support that you need. So very good. Katherine, thank you again. Sarah here, owner of Mindfully Nourished Solutions. It's my goal with this podcast to explore strategies for empowered and well-informed food and eating decisions. If this information has been supportive to you, please head over to iTunes to rate this episode and to leave a review about what was most helpful. To learn more about how food is impacting the way you feel on a day-to-day basis, head over to my website at mindfullynourishedSolutions.com for a copy of my free food mood journal. See you next time.